Hello, fellow detectives. Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast for all things Nancy Drew by Her Interactive. I am your host, Tammy Tuckey, and this week we welcome voiceover artist Mark Waldstein to the show. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Welcome to you from Seattle.
Woohoo! Seattle, the place to be, which I know is for like most of the voiceover actors who are in the Nancy Drew series. Most of you guys come from Seattle, so you guys got a really amazing, voiceover family going on over there.
It's true. When you first contacted me about doing this show, and I looked through some of your past episodes, I found all kinds of friends of mine in there.
You know what? Let's see. Let's jump into the background of like how you got into the entertainment industry originally. Was it, something that ran through your family, or just something that you kind of, it just inspired you and you were like, well, maybe I can do this?
It does run in my family, not necessarily as careers, but as interests and talents. I have cousins who are musicians and singers and on television, and my sister is a tap dancer. So we all have something we contribute to the arts.
So is that a little bit more difficult when you kind of approach the voiceover aspect of the industry, because nobody can see your face, they can just hear you?
Well, that's true. I never really thought about these two things together. But also, on the other hand, voicing is something I've never had any. I've always had plenty of confidence in, so I've never had as much trouble with it as I did with that one tap dance number. But I've been working as a professional actor since about 1985 or so, and I was in Boston for many years, and I did a lot of commercials and voiceovers there. And then I came to Seattle in 1998.
So you had already been established as a voiceover artist. So when did you make that move to Seattle? Like, is that how you heard about it, from some of your Seattle friends who had already been doing some of the games?
I think that was it. I did have some friends who were already involved over there.
How did that work then? Did you send a little audition piece over to them, or did they ask you to come in so they could, hear a couple of different sides and see what would be the best fit for you?
Well, at this point, I cannot remember who initiated, but I definitely did go in and do an audition. And it was I wound up, as I'm sure you know, I wound up doing two different roles in that game.
Oh, yeah, Resorting to Danger, yes. And I saw that and I was like, wow, I wouldn't have been able to tell. And they're two far different individuals from each other, and in their sound as well. So you have the Helgeson, the professor, and you also have Cassidy Jones, who's the secretary. And Cassidy has like this flat delivery, which is so hilarious. I love it. It makes me laugh hysterically. And then you got the mad scientist who's passionate about animals and about his work. So two different individuals. So what did they tell you initially about those characters during the audition process, or did they really not give you anything except like the bare bones?
I don't recall which one I auditioned with, or if I auditioned for both. I actually have sort of a recollection that I may have done a sort of a straight audition and then they plugged me into those two characters. But, it's a definition of character acting to want to enjoy and to be able to look and sound that different and to be able to play multiple characters within one piece of theater or radio or a video game or whatever. That's a fun challenge.
when you went in to record, because you have two characters, and usually from past guests, what they've said is they usually spend about 2 hours just doing their full recording of their character's dialogue. So since you have two different characters, that's double the dialogue, obviously. So did you come in during two different sessions, or did you guys like knock it out in one?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of different sessions, and obviously, uh, as you're saying, just did one character straight through and then started in on the second. Halfdan Helgeson, who was the mad scientist character, um, I think it was already given to me that it would be, well, probably by virtue of the character's name, there was this idea that he was Swedish. And as it happens, I have friends who are originally from Sweden. They live here in the Seattle area now. And I had known them for a long time. And it all clicked for me instantly. I said, oh, I've got a voice for this. And I'm just doing an impression of this friend of mine. And it worked perfectly.
Were you able to do a lot of ad libs with the character in particular?
Oh, sure. I could talk like him right now if you wanted me to.
Oh, well, can I ask a couple questions?
Sure, sure.
What is who is one of your heroes that inspired you the most to go into the scientific field?
That would be Marvin the Mad Bomber. You probably don't know him.
What do you think is your most wonderful accomplishment that you've made for the scientific field?
Well, probably it was letting that whole resort go on by not bombing them at all.
Well, do you think that is there something like a new project you're working on now that you can tell us a little bit about? Like, what is something that you are desperately wanting to work on next?
Bombing my way out of this prison.
Oh no! You're in prison already? No, just kidding. I really love his character, and then I thought it was funny that when they had Cassidy, he was so mellow about everything. And it was funny because when we have that one scene in the middle of the game where all of the characters finally meet one another or are in the same room, it was just so funny to see everybody interact, and Cassidy's just like completely laid back while everybody is so angry and freaking out. And then by the very end of it, when everybody is left, Cassidy's like, Nancy, take it from here. It's all on you now. And it was just so funny the way you delivered it. And it was just like, it made the game so much interesting to have like these different type of characters and have them all usually interact with one another, because I guess that really doesn't happen in the main games as often. Some of these characters are a little bit more cruel or, I guess mean than the typical Nancy Drew characters, but it's just like the snide comments and the comedy of it makes it work. And I just thought that was so much fun. It must have been fun to play with that, right?
It was. And to play two characters within the same piece, certainly you want to try as much as possible for variety and to make them as different as you can make them. And a lot of that comes not only from what you're technically doing with your voice, but the attitude and the approach that you take to the character. I mean, as though you were playing such a character on stage or on camera. It's that character's mental process, I think, that helps differentiate them. And these two are completely opposite, not only in terms of how they sound, but in terms of their energy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And
yeah.
That's the laid back thing that you're talking about. I had a harder time with Cassidy in giving the producers what they seemed to want. Of course, you never really know exactly what you want till you hear it, but we played around for quite a while in the studio about how Cassidy would sound, or I did a lot of takes that they weren't quite satisfied with. Whereas with Halfdan, that we all were happy with that one right away. And what finally did it was they said, think James Spader. That actor never shows you on his face what he is thinking, or you can't tell. He's inscrutable. uh, it's deadpan. And
Yes.
I guess what it is that you're enjoying about the character is the somehow something. I didn't think that you could be deadpan with your voice. Think of that as a facial thing, but I guess there's a kind of a deadpan voice.
And it's interesting because you have another credit on it just as a switchboard caller. So I'm assuming that they had the entire cast of this game just do some like little random extra voices for the switchboard part where Cassidy leaves and Nancy takes over the front desk, which I thought was really like a nice touch. Did you meet the rest of the cast at all, or any of them you're friends with?
One other person in the cast is somebody I already knew, was friends with, although I can't remember. I don't think we were both there on the same day. Uh, Most of the time, and most of the shows, the games that I worked on, they do everything very piecemeal. And the scripts you're given have just your lines, and one of the a very different kind of challenge for performing in these games is the ability to make to say a single line, a sentence, and make it sound as though it would fit into several people in conversation when they're not there.
And when we come from the resorting to danger, which you had, visuals of your characters, with Trail of the Twister, which was the next one, you don't. You have Krollmeister, PG Krollmeister, and he's an inventor, but only on the phone. So how did you guys go about, creating this character and finding the correct sound for his character?
I don't know that I saw Halfdan and Cassidy before I did them, to be honest with you. I think I again, this is so hard because it was such a long time ago, but I feel like I saw them all later on. I remember seeing it on paper. It wasn't like I had to wait all the way until the game was released. But I don't think I was really working from a visual on any of these, is kind of where I'm going with that. But with Krollmeister was fun, and I got to do him a few times across a few games, which was great. And just as I was saying earlier with the other two characters, voice acting is acting. It isn't just how can I make this person sound. You really have to get inside their head. You really have to come up with an attitude, whether it's an attitude toward the other person or people in the scene you're acting with, or an attitude I think in Krollmeister's case, it's his attitude towards the world. Nothing is good enough and everybody's doing everything wrong. Whatever you're doing it wrong. So that became kind of the spine of this character for me that I could always work with.
It's interesting to see him, banter with Nancy. I like that. I like that aspect. And I can only assume, because it says that the Captive Curse, you did additional voices for that. So I'm assuming that they were having you record some material while you were doing Trail of the Twister.
No, there were some times when they would say, hey, look, this is what we got you in here for today. We'd like to do a little something for a game that we're still working on, or something that's still in development. The you mentioned earlier that we in Resorting to Danger, we all had one-liners as people calling into that switchboard, and that was everybody. They told us everybody we have coming in, we're also asking them to play one additional role. So just come up with a crazy voice and be this caller. So there are times when you actually did find yourself in the studio working on something other than the project you thought you were going to work on. And you might not necessarily have any guidance about that from the producers at all, other than just make it sound different. So we'll know nobody will know it was you. And that's when you, I don't know, just resort to your bag of tricks. Every once in a while, I would hear from a friend of mine saying, do you do Nancy Drew video games? I said, well, yeah. I thought it was you. So, I remember once getting a message on Facebook from somebody I hadn't seen in ages and ages. Say, are you PG Krollmeister? Totally out of the blue, not even referencing it. Just throwing that they just threw that name at me, and they said, "Are you PG Krollmeister any chance?" And I said, "Yes, I am." So,
How cool is that? Somebody else
pick me
could
out.
pick you out.
It was a big surprise. I mean, you really do, especially with a video game like this. And I'm not a gamer. Sorry, true confession. Um, if you do work on stage, you know who came and saw you. You say hello to them afterwards, or they tell you they were there.
Yeah.
And that can sort of happen with other recorded media. But the video game, I mean, you really do have the idea that you go in and you do your work, and you may get a copy of it and get a chance to check it out later. And all of this was before YouTube arrived. When you sent me all these clips, I hadn't seen or heard any of this stuff in years, so it was really cool.
But your most recent one for Tomb of the Lost Queen is pretty straightforward. It's John Boyle, and again, he's also a phone character. So this one was a little bit more different because you kind of have to supply the information to Nancy about the setup of the game. So I think it's a lot more serious conversation because, John Boyle, he is injured, and that's why he's not in that particular game, but he's injured as a character, and the stakes are kind of high on this one because you're out in the desert. So how did they set up this game for you in particular?
I think that it just played straight. I mean, they told me these couple of things about him, who he is, and what his relationship is to Nancy. And I worked a little bit with the idea of being, housebound or stir crazy, cabin fever, any of those things, that he's got. But other than that, it's pretty much just me. The character voices and the wacky voices, they're definitely more fun because they're fun, because you get to be a little outrageous. And with Boyle, it was definitely more of just looking at the words and being genuine and playing it straight, as it would be if it were a dramatic role. You're looking at what is he saying and why, and what is his intention, what information is he trying to get across, and make sure that comes through clearly. I just always enjoyed getting the call. After a while, obviously, it would just be that they would call me in and say, "We have a new game. We'd like you to play this character." And I had a great time doing them. And if you're a voice actor, differentiating these things, that's the name of the game, and that's the fun and the challenge of it.
Have you been doing any other games or any other different plays in musical theater since the last game that you did? What can you tell us that you're working on now, or something that we can look forward to, checking out in the future?
Well, I haven't done other game. I did one other. Oh boy, I should have looked this one up before we chatted. There was someone else. There was something that sort of spun off, and I did one game with them, and I played a villain. But the short answer to your question is I really didn't do a lot more with video games after that because I got an agent and representation. And once you move into that level of things, but I have always done much more work on the stage anyway. And I do continue to work pretty steadily as an actor here in Seattle. I've worked with a number of different companies, theater companies here in the Seattle area. People in Seattle might recognize names like Annex and Book It and Village Theater and Arts West. Anybody farther away, no, there's nothing they could come and see unless they're going to buy a plane ticket.
I can't thank you enough for being on the show. It was so much fun to talk to you, Mark. I'm glad we finally got to sit and chat. We've been working on having this conversation for a while now, so thank you so much for being on the show. And my last question for you is, if you could describe your experience working with Her Interactive and being a part of the Nancy Drew universe using one word, what would that be?
Delighted.
Dare to play.